modest Sydney suburb 6 weeks before the beginning of World War II. His father ran a small petrol station, his mother raised 4 boys. Together, they instilled in young John a deep respect for tradition, duty, and quiet discipline. Inspired by Robert Menzies, as a young man he studied law, becoming active in student politics, not to chase popularity, but because he believed in something.
Vital issues which affect the future security of this country.
Mr. Howard entered Parliament in the 1970s, only to face setback after setback. He lost the leadership, lost it again, and for a time was written off completely. But he didn't quit. When others played the short game, Mr. Howard stayed the course. And in 1996, after more than 2 decades in public life, the tide turned. A landslide victory, and with it, the chance to lead the nation. Over the next 11 years, Mr. Howard introduced GST, reformed industrial relations, paid off national debt, reshaped immigration, and led the response to the Port Arthur massacre with the most significant gun reforms in Australian history. He navigated 9/11, joined our allies in the war on terrorism, and through it all, never forgot about the Australian people. Ordinary in image, extraordinary in impact, often underestimated, but never outlasted. Please welcome this week's guest on World Class Voices, the 25th Prime Minister of Australia, John Winston Howard. Mr. John Howard, welcome to World Class Voices.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. It's an honour to sit down with you today. What you've done for the country is sensational, and it brings me great pleasure to be able to host this conversation. To start off, I wanted to set the scene back to 2001. You would have been about 5.5 years into your Prime Ministership, 62 years old. You're actually in Washington, DC, I believe, September 11th, 2001, when 2 planes collided with the World Trade Center. What were the events like leading up to the incident, during, and then what transpired post, if you can cast your memories back?
Oh, I remember it very well. I had gone to Washington to address a joint sitting of the American Congress. It had been an invitation which I was honoured to receive on behalf of Australia from the then President Bush. And I'd been out for a morning walk. And when I got back, I was briefed about a news conference I was to have and talk about a variety of things, including the possible collapse of Ansett Airlines. Well, it had actually collapsed, and we were dealing with the aftermath of that. And at the end of that conversation, my press secretary said to me, in a terrible accident in New York, a plane has hit a tower of the World Trade Center. And I said, that's a terrible accident anyway. 10 minutes later, he was knocking on my door saying, you better turn on your television set. Another plane has hit the other tower. And we then, along with the rest of the world, knew it was no accident. And it was a remarkable chain of events. My wife had been out with my eldest son, who'd come over from London where he was working with Lehman Brothers. And they were sightseeing, and I was worried about them. And anyway, cut a long story short, I was bundled out of the hotel and I went to stay at the residence of the Australian ambassador. And I spent the night there, and it was obvious that this was a epoch-changing, creating event. It was sudden, nobody expected it. I had met President Bush for the very first time the previous day.
Wow.
I hadn't met him before. I spoke to him on the phone. And I had a long meeting with him and Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, and Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor. Oh, and I later went to the joint sitting, but the joint sitting naturally didn't get a speech from me. They were far more preoccupied with this extraordinary challenge. And I was given a standing ovation. I was the only person, along with my wife and the ambassador and his wife, the only people in the public gallery.
Wow.
And I was able then to go onto the floor of the Senate and to thank them and to talk to them about what had happened. And then the next day I arranged with Colin Powell for them to provide me with Air Force 2, which flew me from Andrews Air Force Base to Hawaii, where I picked up a Qantas flight to come home. In the meantime, I'd spoken to John Anderson, who was acting Prime Minister in my absence, about the reaction. And we didn't know whether this was the beginning of a series of attacks. Thought it might be. We thought, what city would be next? What country? London, Paris, Japan, Australia? We didn't know.
What was your relationship with George Bush like?
Oh, we had a good relationship. We became friends and we remained friends. He was a very no-nonsense president, far more stable and predictable than the current president, who I think is very unpredictable. But I liked Bush, and I thought he was given a bad rap by many commentators in the media. But he was a no-nonsense, common-sense man who only wanted to talk about things that were important and relevant. He wasn't interested in parading his knowledge of this, that, or the other. And he was shocked by what had happened, and he made that known.
Do you think the United States have a different relationship with their military and a different relationship with patriotism comparatively to Australia because of how viscerally they've experienced incidents like 9/11?
Oh, I think it's just a different culture. The Americans are more overtly patriotic. They're no more patriotic than we are. They just manifest it differently. Americans aren't as sceptical as we are. We are possessed of what I've always called a very deep deposit of Celtic scepticism, where the Scottish and Irish in us makes us suspicious of people. And we want explanations. We're not easily sold a bill of goods.
You once said we took the good bits of our British heritage and we rejected the bad bits.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's that sense of balance we've always had. We took free speech, freedom of the press, parliamentary system, the rule of law. They're all very good, virtuous things, and we are greatly in debt to our British forebears for those things, but we rejected any notion of class superiority or an aristocracy. We didn't want that, and we made that clear from the beginning. So that's what I mean by taking the good but not the bad.
Do you think we've done the same with the United States in terms of, culturally, they're a big influence to Australia?
Well, America is a cultural hegemon. Our language. I mean, I get tired of people asking me whether I've had a good day or not. To be asked at 7:30 in the morning whether you've had a good day is a bit much, but I refuse to say have a nice day. I prefer the Australian see you later. Well, that was our expression, not nice day.
Who inspires you, Mr. Howard? Out of all of the incredible people that you've had the pleasure of meeting and negotiating with and debating and doing business with.
Well, there's a difference between people who inspire me those I met and hadn't met. The greatest political figure in my lifetime was undoubtedly Winston Churchill. He was an amazing man. I've read a lot about him. The great thing about Winston Churchill was that he got the big things right. He made a lot of mistakes. In the Gallipoli campaign, he had a bit to do with, or many Australians will think there are a fair number of mistakes associated with that. He took Britain back onto the gold standard after World War I, which was a big mistake economically. He supported Edward VIII in the abdication crisis, and probably most egregious of all, he opposed Indian independence. Well, great though you might have been as a lover of the British Empire, but to oppose India getting her independence was a bit over the top. But then on the other hand, he alone warned about Nazi rearmament in the 1930s. And if he'd been listened to, we might have avoided all the horrors of World War II and the extermination of the virtual entirety of the Jewish race. And he gave great leadership. Hadn't been for him, if somebody else had become British Prime Minister after the outbreak of the war, then Britain may have concluded a peace without much honour with Germany, and our lives would have been very different. But he said no, and he took the people with him, and we're forever in his debt for that.
Moving forward into Australia's future, we've had quite the turnover of leaders. We've struggled with leadership. What are the characteristics that are important in your mind in a Prime Minister of Australia?
Well, it varies according to the person, the party and the circumstances. We've had a few Prime Ministers in the last few years, I accept that, but that's happened before. I think we have a better system of government than any others on offer in the democratic world. I think we've seen in the past year that our system of parliamentary government is much better than the American system. Neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris would have got the leadership of their parties in an Australian-style system.
Yep.
And I think we've seen on display how much better and stronger our system is.
Do you think it leaves talent on the table when you've got to be a politician to be able to put your hand up and contribute to the leadership of Australia?
Oh, no, I don't. Look, if you're asking me, does the American system produce better ministers and so forth? The answer is no. I mean, we've just seen Musk was meant to be President's buddy. Need I say more? I have never been convinced that you get better quality ministers. I remember it'd be a little before your time when Robert McNamara, who was the chief executive of the Ford Motor Corporation, was appointed by President Kennedy as his defence secretary, and he went on to be the defence secretary for Lyndon Johnson. He spearheaded the escalation of America's involvement in the Vietnam War and then later recanted all of it, said he was wrong. Well, he was either right first time or wrong. I thought that was extraordinary. He, more than anybody, deepened America's involvement, more than anybody other than Johnson, deepened America's involvement in a war that became very unpopular now. I won't take sides as to whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. The point is that he was this genius from the business community who got them more deeply involved in the most controversial military engagement America's been involved in for 100 years. and one that we as a country supported. And yet later on wrote a book saying it was all a big mistake. Well, I didn't think that was a great example of how you get the best and the brightest, by reaching into the business community without any prior political experience. If I can go back to Churchill, he had plenty of political experience. I mean, he had a lot of other experience. He'd fought in the South African War, he fought in World War One, and he was deeply involved in politics all of his life. Yeah, plenty of them are failures too. But he was an example of a great success. I'm just not convinced that you do better having everybody's name on the table.
What is leadership? When you've got a team of people around you, micro.
Well, I think there are a number of things that are important. First of all, you've got to know clearly what you believe in. You've got to have a capacity to communicate those beliefs. And you've also got to have a capacity to carry people with you. If you can't advocate a cause successfully, you're not going to be much of a leader. The great leaders of history have all been people who can advocate, argue, persuade. In my opinion, Robert Menzies is the greatest Prime Minister Australia's had. And his greatest single quality was that of persuasion. He could charm the birds off the trees. He was very, very good. And that's a great strength. I think the other thing is that you've got to have a good relationship with the people immediately around you. The best generals are those that have a good relationship with their staff officers. The best sporting captains are those who have a good relationship with, can inspire those around them on the field, in the team. And the other thing is you've got to get the big things right. You get a lot of things wrong. Everybody who's in a leadership role who thinks that I'm going to be better than anybody because I'm not going to make any mistakes is doomed to fail. That paralyses you into inactivity.
If you were having a conversation with someone in their 20s and 30s around education, you're a big reader yourself. What would be the immediate parts of life and history you'd suggest they go ahead and learn about as a first priority?
I don't think there is one. I think what you have to do is follow your dreams and interests. It's old advice, but it's good advice. And if you are interested in a subject, you should immerse yourself in all the reading and scholarship you can find on that subject. And, I certainly read a lot and boned up a lot on Australian and world politics.
Because that was your lane.
It was my lane, yeah, very much so. And there's no one single discipline that will prepare you for politics other than life's experiences. A lot of young men and women come to see me and say, we want to go into politics. What's your advice? And the advice, I give them two pieces of immediate advice. I suggest that they should join a political movement that catches their fancy, be it on the left-hand side or the right-hand side or inside out, I don't know. That's up to them. But then get a job in the real world. We now have far too many people who are interested in politics. They go to university, they leave there and they go and work. If they're on the left-hand side, they go and work for a trade union. Then they work in a politician's office and then they try and get chosen as a candidate. If they're on the right-hand side, they don't know near the trade union, but they also get a job in politics of some time on a parliamentarian staff. Now, that may be fascinating, but it doesn't equip you. And I think you should spend at least 8 or 10 years doing something else. I practiced law until I entered Parliament. I entered Parliament at the age of 34. I'd practiced law for 12 years. And that had given me a bit of life's experience.
Absolutely. So the idea is, if you're an aspiring politician, to go and live life and to find a lane before you evolve into politics.
Definitely.
Do you think the role, and now let's talk about the Prime Minister role. Do you think the role has changed and modernised nowadays back to the beginning of the 2000s when you were Prime Minister?
I think it probably has changed a bit, but it's not changed an enormous amount. It involves
more scrutiny,
having attitudes. It involves a willingness to take decisions and to understand that the road eventually ends and you can't keep kicking the can down, otherwise it goes over a cliff and disappears. And I don't think that's changed.
What's life like after being a Prime Minister?
Well, it depends on how successful you think you've been. If you've done good things, you finish it feeling you miss it, or you can't but miss it. But it's better to be thrown out by the public than by your own party. I was thrown out by the public. I was thrown out by my own party when we were in opposition, and then they brought me back. But I led the party on 6 occasions in elections, won 4 of them and lost the first and the last. Not a bad score if you're looking at the Ashes.
Certainly not. What was life like for you after you finished your Prime Ministership?
Oh, look, I adjusted over time. I was disappointed. But I never felt in the end that I'd been cheated. I lost and lost clearly. I was surprised that the Labor Party got rid of Kevin Rudd so quickly. I thought when he beat me 2007, he'd be Prime Minister for at least 2 terms. But he didn't make the first one. So that surprised me.
Are there any habits or rituals, things that you've consistently done over the years or consistently not done over the years that you think's influenced or that you've achieved in your life?
Well, I'm a reasonably disciplined person, but I'm not ultra-disciplined. I still exercise regularly. I think that's very important. I was a regular walker every day, still am. And that helped me a lot. I eat regularly. I remember when I was Prime Minister and a newly elected member would always come and see me and seek a bit of advice. And he said, "Have you got any?" I said, 2 pieces of advice. I said, "Don't run late for aircraft. Gives you ulcers. And ring your wife or husband twice a day. 1 in the morning and 1 late in the evening. Keeps marriages going."
That's a great point because, living a busy lifestyle as a man or a woman, whether you're in the private or the public
it's very
sector,
difficult.
can take a toll.
It's no better or worse in politics. It's always a challenge, and it's very important to keep the home fires burning.
Are there conversations that need to be had with your wife or your husband to kind of lead them and make sure that they're subscribed to the journey you're going on?
Oh, well, my wife, by disposition, was interested in politics.
Right.
She was interested in politics when I met her. I mean, that's not why we fell in love and got married, but it just helped. And we talked naturally and easily and freely about politics. She was a very good judge of people, personalities, characters. Better than me on many occasions, but that's often the case. Now, that was all good and easy.
Is there anything that Is there anything that you wish you understood better about yourself when you were in your 30s and 40s?
Oh, plenty. Too boring to talk about. I never thought I'd make it. I thought at various times I'd end up as maybe a middle-rank minister who'd done a few things. I thought at various times that my political career was over, but I never left Parliament. I think if you want to describe failure in politics, it's when you leave it, such as resigning your seat in our system after you've suffered a setback. I never felt tempted to do that. I remember after I was removed unexpectedly from the leadership, I was asked whether I thought I'd ever return, and I said that was like Lazarus with a triple bypass. And that phrase stuck.
What do you want to see from Australia moving forward? What do we need?
I just want Australia to continue to be an ever fuller version of its best self. We are a very stable country. We are a tolerant country. We are an enterprising country. And I think we should keep it that way. What does that tell us? It tells us that the system of government we have is good. It tells us that our character as a people are fairly sceptical yet optimistic people who aren't going to get carried away with some political version of a snake oil salesman. We're not going to do that. We're not going to fall for that. But also to recognise that we have to lift our game on occasions. I think we're going to lift our game at the moment. All the rage is productivity. What does productivity mean? It means getting more out of what you now have. We have an investment of labour, materials and capital. And so we've got to get our people working better. In some cases harder, but in most cases just smarter. We've got to utilise our financial resources better, invest them in the right things, and we've got to trade the things that we have, that we're good at and we have in plentiful supply. I mean, I've got some reservations about the climate change thing, because we are a country that's rich in natural resources, in coal, iron ore, gas, uranium. And I'm not particularly attracted to rapidly dismantling our industries surrounding those commodities.
How do we best manage our relationship with China and the United States?
Well, I think we just have to focus on the strengths in both. I mean, we'll always be closer to America than China, irrespective of who the president of America is, because our values are similar. Values bind countries to each other more tightly than anything else. That doesn't mean that we do everything America does or try and do it. And we are more dissimilar from Americans than a lot of Australians imagine. We've got a lot in common, more or less speak the same language. But they are, as I said earlier, they are a less sceptical people. And Americans are more cordial often than Australians. And some Americans can find some of the aggressive openness of Australians a bit daunting. It's just a requirement that they understand us as well as us understanding them.
Mr. Howard, you've got a strong reputation for having a really well-oiled Liberal Party and leading your...
Well, I don't have any Liberal Party at the moment. I mean, I'm out of it.
Certainly, back when you were Prime Minister.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yep. What's your advice to the Liberal Party and the Nationals right now?
Well, don't blow your brains out because you've lost a couple of elections. That's happened before. And I always think it's a terrible mistake to pronounce the death of a political party when it loses heavily. You know, I can remember when the Labor Party, having waited 23 years in opposition, won in 1972 under Gough Whitlam, who had great style and charm and flair. And then it was blown out of office 3 years later. And people said, oh, it's the end of the Labor Party. No, it wasn't. And parties can regenerate. But clearly, part of that process is to work out what your values are and to build policy reflecting those values.
That's a great point. Do you think there's a possibility of us following in the UK's footsteps with having a third party that has stronger and clearer conservative values?
Well, we have a lot in common with the Brits, but their voting system's different from ours. Ours is better. I think preferential voting is much better because it's a fuller reflection of what the electorate thinks. Too early to pronounce the triumph of reform over the Conservative Party. Conservative Party has got to go back to what it's meant to stand for.
Alrighty guys, we're going to take a really quick break from today's episode to talk to you about our sponsor, Kingfishers Bend Farm. At the beginning of this year, I made a decision that I wanted to make 2025 my best year yet, and I knew my health needed to be on point for me to do that. And so, that's great sleep, that's exercising regularly. I'm not drinking any alcohol this year, but it also means fueling my body with the highest quality, most nutrient-dense food I can to put me in the best position to perform highly. And that's why I'm working with Kingfishers Bend Farm. Kingfishers Bend Farm are a local family-owned farm from down in northern New South Wales. They put a lot of love into what they do. They raise paddock-to-plate beef. And as you can see here, we've got plenty of different cuts. We've got, obviously steaks. I mean, the marbling on that is just sensational. Have a look at that. Beef ribs. We've got bones for bone marrow. We're going to cook some bone marrow up. We've got beef mince. We've got ground beef. We've got sausages. We've got the whole lot here. This is actually a quarter beast on the table right in front of me, which is pretty cool. You can order a quarter beast, a half beast, or a full beast at any point in time. And fortunately for everyone who watches this show, Kingfishers Bend Farm have been incredibly generous. They're offering $250 off everybody's first order. So whether you want to buy a quarter beast, a half beast, or a full beast, they're offering $250 off your first order. To claim the offer, just head to kingfishersfarm.store and include Sam Hope as the code in your checkout. And look, just before we get back to the episode, the way I look at these things is if you're driving a McLaren and you're wanting to get the highest performance from that supercar as possible, you're not putting E10 or 91 in the vehicle. You're putting the most highest octane petroleum that you can possibly get your hands on. And I don't think it's any different with our bodies. If we're wanting to perform at the highest possible levels and be sharp in meetings, walking into a room where people just go, wow, that guy's on. What's that guy on? What's he taking? We've got to fuel our bodies with the best possible nutrient-dense food. And that's why I'm so happy to be working with Kingfishers Bend Farm. Claim the offer, kingfishersfarm.store, use code SAMHOPE at checkout, and I look forward to getting back to this episode. Do you think there needs to be more of a focus on the cities for the Liberal Party?
Oh, I think Liberal Party's got to avoid the mistake of narrow casting in any way. I mean, we are out to win support from all of the country, recognising that in a coalition the National Party will always have a heavier focus on the bush.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's sensible. But that will come back. I think what has happened in the cities is that the Liberal Party has lost votes to the Teals because they're disgruntled Liberals who think the Liberal Party has forgotten what it's meant to represent.
Mm.
And we've got to address that. When you address that, I think things will return. But it won't be easy. There'll be a lot of debate about what we have to do to reclaim our natural constituency. But it will come.
Mm. If you had to, man of the hour is Trump at the moment. If you had to kind of think of what characteristic of Trump's you most admire and least admire, what do you suppose those would be?
I've never thought of it in those terms. I don't see him as representing traditional conservative values. I mean, I think most conservatives would respect and support the intelligence services, but he spent a lot of his time when he was first president attacking them.
Mm.
I think he would favour, a traditional conservative would favour stability and predictability in relations. He would not attack his nearest neighbour, Canada. I think Trump's attack on Canada is appalling. We've just marked the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. The third largest army that landed on the shores of France in June 1944 was the Canadian Army, exceeded only by the Americans and the Brits. There were thousands upon thousands of Canadians. And I think for him to sneeringly refer to Canada as the 51st state and the Prime Minister of that country as governor is just demeaning and meant to be demeaning. And if you really feel strongly about another country, the last thing you do is be anything other than authentic in how you treat it. And I think for him to sneer at Canada, an ally decades old, is extraordinary.
Mm. One very core difference between the United States and Australia is their gun laws.
Mm.
And of course, that's one of the largest elements of your Prime Ministership was the gun reform. What was that like?
Oh, well, look, it was something that came unexpectedly. Only weeks after I'd become Prime Minister, I knew instinctively that I had to do something big about it because 35 people killed by an individual. And I knew it was going to be hard, but I had great support, particularly from my National Party colleagues who had a number of people in their electorates who resented being caught up with the restrictions that we imposed. They said, we haven't done anything wrong. We look after our weapons, we lock them up and all that. And I understood that, but I knew equally that unless it applied to everybody, without exception, then it wasn't going to work. And in the end, I won the debate with tremendous help from Tim Fischer and John Anderson and Rob Borbidge, the National Party Premier of Queensland. And the public supported it. And to this day, I get more people stopping me in the street, particularly women, to thank me for the gun laws.
Following 9/11, you obviously committed troops to support the United States to Afghanistan and I believe later Iraq. What was your thought process around that?
Well, I was concerned that we should show strength and support for our ally, America. I was also worried that if we didn't do our bit to fight terrorism, the terrorists might hand weapons of mass destruction to extremist groups. I believe, based on genuine intelligence, that Iraq did have weapons of mass destruction. As it turned out, there were no stockpiles of weapons found. We found all the plans to make them, the programs, but none of the physical stockpiles. Now, whether they were buried somewhere in Iraq or Syria, or I don't know. But we certainly didn't make up that intelligence.
To the future generation of the country, what advice do you give to young adolescents coming into the world?
Well, my advice is be grateful that you live in the best country in the world. Be grateful that we are a stable, successful, tolerant nation. Be angry when people try and denigrate Australia's achievements. I talk a lot about the Australian achievement, and that achievement is that we have built an open, tolerant, enterprising nation that believes in free enterprise, believes that people are entitled to make as much money as the circumstances allow, provided they pay their proper share of tax and make the money honestly. Those conditions are fulfilled. I don't envy people who are successful, and neither should any young person. People should aspire to be successful, subject to those two conditions. And we should continue to take people from around the world. In other words, I believe in migrations, but I also believe that people come here because of who we are, not because of what they want us to become. In other words, by welcoming people, we're saying, hop aboard the Australian family train, but don't try and turn it into another kind of train.
Our culture.
Our culture, our attitude. And they naturally modulate, change, vary over the years.
Mr. Howard, I grew up in Byron Bay.
Did you?
I did.
Good luck.
Yeah, correct. And, one of the...
Did you leave?
I certainly did.
Why?
I've got incredibly audacious goals, and simply put, you can't fulfill them in a small little town.
No, true.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a lovely beach town. It's also home to the Greens, if we're looking at this politically. I love Byron Bay. I love the Northern Rivers. But, I grew up in a household which was left-wing. I'm a young Australian conservative male now. And
to borrow Shakespeare, I see a good amendment of life in thee, Hal. That's good.
Too often, people around me look at the Australian flag synonymously with the word racism. And I think the fact that so many parts of our country can't even celebrate our national day is horrendous. And it's a really difficult one to lead because you're not going to please everybody. What's your approach? How do you even attack that conversation?
Well, I'm not sure that the great majority of Australians are ambivalent about our flag. I think most people, some don't like it, but I think most people say, well, it's our flag and we'll honour it. As far as Australia Day is concerned, well, when I was a young person, it was called Anniversary Day. It wasn't called Australia Day. It was the anniversary of British settlement in what was then New South Wales. And then later it morphed into Australia Day, and there's debate about it. But what's the alternative? I mean, the only possible alternative is the 1st of January, which is the day the Commonwealth of Australia, the 6 colonies federated to form the nation. Now, that would logically be the replacement, but I don't think the public out there is going to like compressing, getting rid of one holiday and turning it into another one.
Yeah, turning two into one. Certainly not.
No.
Mr. Howard, before we close for today, I've got a fun final segment. And this segment is called This or That. So I'm going to read you 2 options and you've just got to select your preference. Reading non-fiction or reading fiction?
Non-fiction.
Australia's country or Australia's coast?
Equal.
Gut instinct or data-driven strategy?
Oh, gut instinct.
A quiet day reading or a spirited dinner debate?
Depends on the company.
And of course, the MCG or the SCG?
The SCG, because it's preserved the history. The MCG is a magnificent ground. And Melburnians are the greatest sports viewers in the world. They're wonderful. But I'm afraid they got rid of all the old buildings and the character of the place has been degraded.
Thank you very much for today, Mr. Howard. It's, as I said when we entered this conversation, it's an absolute honour. It's surreal to be sitting here having a conversation with you. As a young man, going through our previous leaders, it's of my view that you were the last leader of our country that led with strength and capableness. And on behalf of all Australians, I want to say a massive thank you.
Well, you're very kind, very generous, and I've enjoyed the talk.